Hello and good evening. As a few more guests continue to join us, I'd like to take a moment to introduce myself. My name is Kimberly Fleck. I am a Development Officer for Strategic Partnerships and Programs at the Royal Alexandra Hospital Foundation. I have the privilege of working alongside the incredible Lois Hole Hospital Women's Society, united in our mission to raise funding for the Lois Hole Hospital for Women. After what is, I assume and hope, was a wonderful summer break, I'm very excited to welcome you all to our first Between Us lecture of the year. We have an engaging evening planned with a timely discussion on vaccinations led by Dr. Robin Harrison and Dr. Shannon MacDonald, and I'm pleased to welcome Becky McIntyre to share a special message with all of us.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Kimberly. My name is Becky McIntyre. Welcome to Between Us. I am excited to represent the Lois Hole Hospital Women's Society on behalf of our co-chairs tonight. Since our founding in 2017, we have raised over $1 million to support the Lois Hole Hospital for Women, thanks to supporters like many of you here. We're thrilled to have you here as we work to raise awareness and funds for Alberta's only dedicated women's hospital, which provides specialized care for women in all ages and stages of life. And our Between Us series was created to provide a safe space for discussing intimate and often overlooked subjects in women's health, such as personal health matters. And we were so excited for this conversation between us here tonight about vaccines and routine vaccinations throughout all stages of your life. Thank you for being here and for participating respectfully tonight. And of course, a huge heartfelt thank you to Alberta Blue Cross for their generous support as our presenting sponsor. Your commitment allows us to host this informative series and make meaningful impact in our community. And just before we dive into tonight's session, I have a few housekeeping tips for everybody to make this interactive and the best experience for you. So please do, if you have questions, there will be a Q&A portion at the end. So please type your questions into the Q&A box. You can see that at the bottom there. And these questions will be addressed anonymously. And anything that you post into the chat box, if you use that function, that is shared with everybody here that's participating in this Between Us conversation. Because we're using the Zoom webinar platform, only the panelists, the people speaking tonight, will be visible, so you can't accidentally turn your camera on, no fear there. And also, if you need the support of live captioning to improve your experience here, you can turn on that show captions functionality in Zoom. And know that each lecture that we do here is recorded and available later on the Women's Society YouTube channel. And after the event, please do help us out by remembering to fill out the feedback survey. You get a chance to win a $25 gift card courtesy of Alberta Blue Cross. And I hope you find tonight a valuable and informative session. Now, I'm going to pass it over to Marianne, our presenting sponsor from Alberta Blue Cross.
You and thank you for having us here today. So my name is Marianne Hart, and I am here from Alberta Blue Cross. My pronouns are she, her, and it's a pleasure to be here tonight. At Alberta Blue Cross, we value the importance of talking about women's health, especially topics such as today's subject on the importance and efficacy of vaccinations in children and throughout pregnancy. As always, we are very proud to be sponsoring this series. And before we begin our lecture, we would like to share our gratitude and appreciation for the land from which we all benefit, and we'll look to the guidance of Indigenous community leader Connie Calahoo Stonehouse to lead us through a land acknowledgement.
Tanse, greetings. We gather here in Treaty 6 territory, where the Blackfoot, the Cree, the Dene, the Nakota Sioux, the Anishinaabe, Saulteaux, the Métis, and the Iroquois peoples, which is my family, call this our homelands. During my grandparents' lifetimes, this land was not only their home, but their hospital and their healthcare system. Their health and well-being were connected to each other and to the land. The berries we picked, our medicines, sweetgrass, sage, bare root, and many others were all harvested in the rhythm of the seasons. The water they would drink was from the lakes and the rivers, where they would also fish to feed our families. We must not forget how important our connection to the land is. For the food we grow, the water we drink, not just for ourselves, but for future generations. I'm here to remind you, we still have much work to do in our relationship with the land, the water, and each other. As Treaty 6 relatives, we must remember what our ancestors agreed to. As long as the sun shines, the grass grows, and the rivers flow, we will look after each other, the land, the water, and all the beings that we share these lands with. Hi, hi.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Alberta Blue Cross. I now have the absolute honor of introducing tonight's speakers. We have two wonderful people here with us tonight. First, we have Dr. Robin Harrison, a clinical professor of infectious diseases at the University of Alberta. She also works as an infectious disease specialist for Edmonton and is a communicable disease consultant for the Alberta Health Services. Dr. Harrison is a member of the Alberta Advisory Committee on Immunization and chair of Canada's National Advisory Committee on Immunization. She earned her medical degree from Dalhousie University, completing a subspecialty in training in internal medicine and infectious disease at the University of Alberta. And recently, she added a master's in public health and epidemiology from the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine to her list of achievements. So welcome, Dr. Harrison. And our second presenter today is Dr. MacDonald, a professor in nursing and an adjunct professor in public health at the University of Alberta. She's a Tier 2 Canada Research Chair in Applied Pediatric Immunization with a research program focused on identifying and addressing systemic level barriers and supports to achieving high vaccine uptake. Dr. MacDonald completed her Master of Nursing degree at Memorial University in Newfoundland and worked as a registered nurse in pediatric intensive care before completing her PhD at the University of Alberta and postdoctoral fellowship at the University of Calgary and the Alberta Ministry of Health. So welcome also, Dr. MacDonald. Thank you both for being here tonight for this conversation between us. I will now pass the mic over to you and I will return to chat with you during our Q&A.
Thank you very much. And good evening, everyone. And I wish to also say thank you for the land acknowledgement, which opens our time together beautifully. It was also very beautiful and quite appropriate for, I think, Lois Hole. So what I'm going to do, I'm Dr. Robin Harrison. I'm just going to share my presentation. And I'm going to be presenting the first half of our sort of formal presentation portion. Dr. MacDonald will present the second half, and then we have time for discussion. And I'm just waiting for my slides to transition into a slideshow. I think it's there now. If someone can just speak up if it's not in the correct view. So I want to just start by mentioning I don't have any conflicts of interest with tonight's presentation. I do have a few declarations. Most of them you heard in the introduction. I work in the prevention of infectious diseases, both in Edmonton, where I live, and provincially. I also sit on advisory committees, and I do participate in some research, but I'm not paid for the vaccines I'm going to present tonight. I'm going to talk about a few vaccines, and I'll be using trade names, and that's because I've learned through patients that's how people recognize them best. So you will see those on the slide, but I wanted to make it clear I don't have financial conflicts. And I'm here because I believe in community, which I think is probably why you're all here too. And I wanted to just say I feel really honored to participate, both because I value my colleague and our host tonight, and but also everybody here in our Alberta community, and also Lois Hole. And community is the theme I'm going to try to weave into our presentation. And I think it's very fitting for her and the legacy she left behind. I tried to find a quote of hers related to community, and I don't know that this is exactly that, but this is a very hopeful message that I'm sure many of you have seen, and I think is quite applicable to the topic of infectious disease prevention in the future. So I've left that here on the slide. I also know that Lois Hole was clearly committed to education, even if you didn't know her personally. She was very visible, not only formal education, handing out university degrees at the University of Alberta, including my own, but countless others. But also, she believed in continuing education for community members, which again, I think is the spirit of a presentation like this. And Hole's greenhouse in St. Albert was really well known for really good quality service, but they employed countless students. I thought almost everybody there was a student. So it was a very good summer part time job for students in St. Albert, but it also, I think, allowed sharing of a love of gardening. And for anyone who is a gardener, you probably know this means watching things grow and evolve, which also just really hits the topic of vaccines, at least for me. And so that's what I hope to share in the next 20 minutes. I see analogy with gardens in all that's evolving on the vaccine landscape. So I thought we might then just start with a little bit of history. So vaccines, of course, are not new, but they might be older than some of you realize. And maybe it harks back to coining this term and idea of vaccination to 1796, much older than anyone here, I'm sure. What you may or may not know, of course, well, you probably do know the first vaccine was smallpox, and there was a raging epidemic. It was horrible, but smallpox vaccine was compulsory for a very long time. And one thing I've learned over the years is that vaccine hesitancy or resistant to something like a compulsory vaccine program is not new. And in fact, if you go to some of the museums that focus on Dr. Jenner's work and some of the colleagues at that time, you'll even find old fashioned cartoons that show deceased bodies, Dr. Jenner, and then anti vaxxers basically arguing with him with language to match the time. It's very interesting. So that's not a new concept, and I think it's worth reflecting on now. Um, the other thing is apparently, rumor has it that really the first public health clinic in the UK was probably in his garden shed. And so, again, it's quite appropriate that we are being hosted by the Lois Hole Women's Society tonight. But in the 1950s, this part many of you will know and remember is that routine immunization programs really began. And I'm going to focus us in now on Canada. So in 1964, there were actually 6 routine immunizations, and we had a National Advisory Committee on Immunization formed because this was getting really exciting and also complicated. So this committee is what's called internationally is called a NITAG, so a National Technical Advisory Group to help guide best use of vaccines. So Canada's NITAG, NACI, is one of the oldest at 60 years this year. So we have a long history, and it's really evolved from that 6 to over 30 vaccine preventable diseases, others in the pipeline, which is really exciting, but also multiple products per disease. And the reason I'm sharing all this is I think it helps us to see why sometimes it can seem like a complex landscape. It's a bit akin to all the different perennials and things out there. You need a little help here and there, and to learn which ones are going to be the best one to use in the best place, best setting. And in our case, we're talking about population and individual. So I am not a historian, so I'll take us quickly out of this kind of review of the past. But I did just want to take an opportunity to say, for anyone who doesn't know, the Royal Alexandra Hospital had a polio ward. There was a polio committee. The doctors volunteered. This speaks to spirit of community. It was really unprecedented because of how devastating this infection infecting young children uh, really was. I think it has left a long impact, and I'm going to come back to this idea. The nursing school was attached to the Royal Alexandra Hospital, and there are even stories you can read about power outages where the nurses would manually operate the iron lung to support the patients. And of course, the patients weren't all children, but it was a lot of children. Something I didn't realize, but several people in Edmonton, including some of my physician colleagues, are much more knowledgeable about polio than me, and I've learned different pearls from them over and over. Like at different times, new things keep coming up about this polio time. But apparently, at the university hospital, there was a small batch of the Jonas Salk vaccine in its first trial phase in 1954 before it was authorized in 1955. And not many Canadian cities had that. So this is really part of our history. It was an important time, and there was tremendous progress around the world, as you likely know, with polio. So I want to shift now to a bit of a primer on vaccines, because I think we are probably a diverse audience here, and I wish we had time to see and meet everyone up front so I could really have a sense of that. But I'm going to just give a bit of review on some of the language used in vaccinology and on the topic of immunizations. And I will say, I'm bringing this to you from a scientific and medical background. So my way of knowing in the world is through biomedicine or Western medicine, however you like to call it. And so that's what I'm going to share here to set up us up for conversation. So the first thing is that primary prevention through immunization is one of medicine's greatest success stories. It's absolutely unbelievable. It's so wonderful that we can do this thanks to great science. And I'll share some examples. The second point is that communities of immunity help us locally, but also nationally and globally. And I think, if nothing else, the COVID-19 pandemic showed us how interconnected we are, not just tourist travel, but trade and all sorts of other things. We really are a global community, and this becomes clear when you have a communicable disease. So, in the words of our Canadian immunization guide, immunization is one of the most important accomplishments in public health that has, over the past 50 years, led to the elimination, containment, and control of diseases that were once very common in Canada. There are many different infographics, knowledge translation, many different ways of trying to demonstrate this. This is an older poster now from about a decade ago, but I've always liked this one. I keep it in my office because it just helps to sort of illustrate, in the year before vaccine was introduced, on the left, you'll see how many cases of common diseases were occurring in Canada. And in the other column, you see the average over the 5 years after vaccine was introduced. And so, for example, measles, tens of thousands of cases. But after vaccine, almost none. Measles, we should note, has been eradicated from the Americas, actually. So the cases we've been seeing so far have been imported from a traveler, for example. Imported, that's what I mean, because it's endemic elsewhere in the world. That means it's still circulating regularly elsewhere in the world. But when a case comes, there has been spread in Canada. And this is why there's a lot of concern, even with every single case, because we don't want to see it spreading here all the time, all year in Canada. It would be a major step back for the world and of course, for people living in Canada. So I have just about 5 slides on what does immunization really mean, because as I said, I personally, I think it can get complex. So immunization is a process by which you become protected against a disease, and it's typically through a vaccine, or what you and I probably think of as a vaccine, which is often a needle in the arm, but it can actually be intranasal, like the live attenuated intranasal vaccine, or it can be subdermal. Um, and sorry, bear with me. I'm getting a very bad message on my computer here. I've had a little technical trouble with my power outlet, so I'm just going to see. I think what I might do, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to fix this. So I'm going to turn off my video, and I'll just carry on for a minute here. Sorry, everybody.
It all looks good on our end, but
Okay, yeah, I just it's funny. It's showing that there's power, and it said 78% when it started, and it's not looking good. You can see the slides now, right?
yeah.
Yeah, we can.
Okay. Okay, thanks. I will, I'm going to carry on. And I'll have to just, what I'll do if we have a problem is I'll just hand over to Dr. MacDonald, and then I'll get onto another computer, and I'll finish my portion after.
Yeah,
So
no problem.
this vaccine, if you're in the United States, is probably called a shot, or if you're in the UK, you're going to call it a jab. So these are the kind of the colloquial terms. It's all the same thing: vaccine, inoculation, shot, jab, immunization. But remember, what this is doing is using your immune system. So here on this slide, what you see are several different pathogens. Measles, note the little triangles. Those are the antigens. You probably all saw the SARS-CoV spike protein. That was an antigen. Chickenpox looks like a Lego block here on your, I guess that's your top right. And in the bottom left, you have influenza. They're all unique. And the antibodies, when you have them preformed and ready to go in your body, they're what contain these things, so you can clear them before they wreak havoc and cause you illness. When you have a new pathogen, like we did with COVID-19, that's where there's a problem. And so your body has to do something to gain some immunity. And the really elegant thing about a vaccine is that in a variety of different ways, depending on the vaccine, your body makes or uses, in the case of an attenuated live vaccine, but often makes or provides a small antigen to get you the antibody you need for protection so that you never have to experience the disease to get that. And so it's a safer way to develop immunity. Some people say natural immunity when you get infected. Well, yeah, but actually, immunity by vaccine, you could argue, is natural too. It's your body's immune system making those antibodies, but the antigen you've presented was delivered through a tiny needle or inhaled or swallowed in the case of oral polio instead of the full-blown disease. And obviously, the main point is that a full-blown infection is risky, and with some pathogens, it's deadly. And of course, it's uncomfortable, and there's all sorts of other problems, and it can spread person to person. With vaccine, you eliminate that. So that's why it is just desirable. That's at an individual level. Now I want to focus on community. Sometimes we used to call this herd immunity, and it still is herd immunity. But as one of my colleagues once said, I don't know why it's called herd. We're not. It's not like we are cattle. So
Oh, it looks like she warned us, so we might have lost Dr. Harrison there. Dr. MacDonald, if you, because we don't know when she'll pop back on, she'll get her power sorted out. We can switch into your presentation now. If you're ready for that.
Sure, if that.
Yeah.
It's a shame because Dr. Harrison's presentation provides such a great foundation. But yeah, we need to learn to flex, eh?
That's right. We just go with the flow. Sometimes this stuff happens. So everyone on all the participants and listeners, thanks so much for bearing with us as we deal. Sometimes there's technical things that happen.
Yeah.
So,
I know Dr. Harrison was in clinic all day today, so I'm sure she's scrambling. Okay, I will. There, can I confirm that you can see my slides? Okay.
The presentation, yeah, it was good. Yep.
Okay, well, thank you very much for the invitation to join you all tonight. And like I said, my presentation was intended to sort of build on the foundation of Dr. Harrison's, but hopefully I don't refer to things that seem completely like foreign and unknown. I'll try and remember to define things as I go if needed. So the focus of my presentation is more so on childhood vaccines. Dr. Harrison was going to talk more about some adult vaccines and vaccinations in pregnancy and for older adults. So I'll start with, as Dr. Harrison did, a declaration of interests. So I do receive research grant funds from national and provincial funding bodies as part of a competitive peer review process. But these funds are sent to the university to support my research. I don't personally receive any of those funds. And I think it's also important to declare my biases. So I'm a pediatric nurse by training. I used to work in the pediatric intensive care, and I've seen the adverse outcomes that it can occur when children contract infectious diseases. And I am also the parent of 2 teenage children, that should say, which also drives my passion for supporting child health. And maybe I'll pause because I see
Shannon.
Dr. Harrison is back.
Yeah, sorry about this. I could, if you want, just finish because I know we
Yes.
designed this so you would flow. Sorry
I
about
know
this,
I had
everybody.
just finished giving all sorts of apologies for, talking about things that we hadn't yet defined. So,
Okay, so let's take two, and I'm very securely plugged in here. Sorry about this, everyone. Um, so in 1 minute, this should slideshow, which will look better. And I'm going to turn my video off because I still have some low power, but I'm plugged in. So can you see at least the slides, even though I know it's not yet in slideshow?
Yeah. It's come back up, Dr. Harrison. It's looking good. It's just not in slideshow yet, but happy to have you back.
Thank you. Really sorry about this.
It's all good.
Okay, so community immunity. Shannon, as part of my community, having just heard her declarations, I'm very glad, is likely immunized for some of the common things I worry about because she's worried about others in her community. And that's kind of the point of community immunity. So a vaccine protects an individual. But if everybody is immunized, that helps when there's a few people who just don't respond as the healthy and young. And so, for example, newborns, they have a very immature immune system. They can't develop that nice response when they're first born. They rely on antibodies from their mother and from community protection, and that can be done a number of ways, including staying home alone and different things. But when people are immunized around a young infant, it protects them. Same with the elderly who may have what we call immunosenescence, where their immune system is getting old and it's not working as strong as it or as well as it did when they're younger. We protect them when we get our influenza immunization because younger and sort of working age people um, will develop a better response, for example. So there's also rare people that have allergies to vaccines or some reason why they can't be immunized. And so a community of people around them can protect them. It's actually a very lovely idea, but on a much more scientific level, it can be very effective and powerful. And so this is just a picture I saw from Public Health Ontario in the last year, and I thought this is kind of cool, whoever's designed this. You see the people in blue with the shield, the immunized ones, so they have those little antibodies that protect them. So when the people that are infected with the red, looks like a SARS-CoV-2 virus, it's not, they've got a buffer there, and you can see they're surrounding the people in green who may be a little vulnerable. They may not be immunized, they maybe can't get immunized, or they didn't respond to the vaccine because maybe they're getting chemotherapy or they have rheumatoid arthritis with a heavy dose of immune suppression or something like that. So this is the way we get added benefit from vaccine. That's a little harder to measure, but it's a part of how this works. So I want to bring us to the current context. Vaccine landscape is really exciting. As I mentioned, over 20 to 30 diseases that can be prevented already with many different products and ways to do that. That can seem complex and that may come up in our discussion, but I just want to sort of set the stage here. And trust in science is a topic being discussed at this time, and it's a really important one. And so, this again is such a nice thing that our hosts have put together to be able to just explore this a little as a group. Vaccine hesitancy and confidence, we have one of Canada's experts on the line in Dr. MacDonald. So it's not trivial. Vaccine hesitancy was actually listed as one of the top threats to global health in the year before the pandemic. This was a problem before everything we've just been through. And so this really signaled a trend that we should be mindful of. So I just wanted to share two things before I get to some specific vaccines. This is a vaccine confidence project. Dr. Heidi Larson, who's one of the global experts in vaccine hesitancy and confidence from the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, has this really neat project. This is her together with collaborators, and it's quite interesting. So I pulled out Canada to just take a look at Canada. So Canada is considered a confident country when it comes to vaccines, and when you compare across the globe. But the latest data, which is from 2018, and no doubt, well, there is more updated from some of our researchers, and I'm sure you're going to be hopefully seeing more of this in the years ahead. But before the pandemic, it looked like 77% of Canadians felt vaccines were safe, 82 percent think they're effective, and most think it's important for children to have vaccines. That was the focus of their question. The point I want to make, though, is it had declined. So in 2015, just 3 years early, those numbers were around 85%. People felt they were safe at 85% 3 years before. And when you look at some of the details, this is where I want to link back to the polio. Look at the age groups of the respondents. So a lot of the people that were quite confident about this were a little older, 55 and above. And look at the 18 to 24-year-olds. So it really begs the question, what's happened that we have this trend? And I'm not going to say it's as simple as saying that some saw polio and some didn't. It's multifactorial, as you hear from Dr. MacDonald. But I do want to point out that this is being looked at, observed, and we have opportunity to listen and learn more and help bring people together on this topic. It's not. Um, it's also a fact that south of the border, they're having similar concerns about confidence or hesitancy. And this is just one piece I wanted to pull out. This is a Gallup poll where they interviewed just over 1,000 randomly selected households in the United States. Interestingly, they asked about political leaning. So they asked about political leaning and asked the question, do you think vaccines are more dangerous than the disease? And they present this divide with Republicans in the red being more likely to say vaccines are more dangerous than disease, and the people that were politically leaning toward Democrat candidates apparently feeling the opposite. So um, with that, I want to use examples of vaccines in our communities. As I said, this will set the stage for sort of our discussion in the second half. So we're going to work backwards because I'm an adult infectious disease physician and Dr. MacDonald's a pediatric nurse. So we're going to go sort of Benjamin Button style or something here. But why not? Let's start because we talk a lot about children immunization. Let's talk about adults. So I'd like to speak about protection for older women first, and then protection in pregnancy and protection of infants in the first few months of life. We're going backwards to bring us to Dr. MacDonald. I will say I'm not covering everything, and it's tricky with a tight timeline to know where to focus, but I'm going to pull out a few examples to help shed light on a few different themes that cross a lot of our vaccines. This is a Willy Wonka quote. Actually, the bubbles apparently, and I think it's actually been slightly modified from it. Actually, the bubbles taste like dirt. It's what's in the bubbles and what they do that is remarkable. And actually, seems like the perfect segue to talk about the shingles vaccine, because if anyone's had it here, you'll know that it can really hurt your arm for a day or two. Most people talk about that. But the point is, shingles is ugly. It's a really ugly disease. And interestingly enough, it gets much uglier the older we get, in that it can cause tremendous pain that persists beyond the shingles event. It's caused by the herpes zoster virus, and it's really common. So we're used to thinking about heart disease statistics and cancer. I don't know if you know this, but 1 in 3 Canadians over a lifetime, if they aren't immunized, will develop shingles. That's a lot of people, and it could be you and it could be me. And it's a very interesting thing that this virus does. It's the same virus that causes chickenpox, but it sits there sort of hiding, sleeping in the nerve root around our spine. And then when our immune system starts to age and gets a little, I guess, lazy at containing that thing, or if we get some immunocompromising medications or a condition, then it rears its head. And it's a painful rash. It will go away eventually, but if you can believe it, this part you may not know, about 40% of people experience a complication. And whether that's eye disease or chronic pain that lasts for years, or a bacterial infection that can even lead to sepsis, it's a big deal. That's a lot of people affected with a really high stakes event, and it can be contagious to others, although not as contagious as chickenpox. That's if you touch it that it can be contagious. What I want to show you here is the age incidence per hundred, or sorry, per thousand person years. This is just Alberta's on the top. It doesn't matter. They're all tracking the same way. Alberta, BC, and Manitoba, Ontario. What you're seeing here is this takeoff at age 50. So at 50, your risk starts increasing and it just keeps going up. This is the risk of having shingles. So that's why you'll see or know that there's national advice to seek singles protection, and you should start that at 50. You want it to last until you're old when it's going to be really severe, but you also don't want to miss the chance to prevent it in your 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, so on. And if you have immune compromise, you could start at age 18. So it's a highly effective vaccine we have now. It's not live like the previous vaccine, Zostavax, which is helpful for immunocompromised, and it actually has a stronger immune response. And when I say strong, I mean this vaccine works really well. It's over 90% effective. 90% effective in preventing the pain. And of course, it prevents a lot of hassle, costs, and all kinds of other things too. And the main thing to know about with side effects is it does cause a sore arm. I warn everybody, you'll probably get a sore arm. It helps if you know what to expect. It doesn't last long, a couple days, but it's a real thing. So it'd be amazing if this was available free for everybody and part of a public program like the way our children vaccines are. The thing is, these vaccines are expensive and we're not there yet. But for people with severe immune compromise in Alberta, this is paid for. And for everybody else, it's available to us at pharmacies and we can purchase this vaccine to protect ourselves. I'm going to shift gears to pneumococcal disease. This is a bacterial infection that causes pneumonia in adults. It causes a host of diseases in young children and some more minor things like ear infection, sinus infections that never feel minor if you're the one that's getting those. It's a huge cause of death in young children, but it's also a probably under-recognized cause of death in adults. So when an adult gets disease in their lungs and a bloodstream infection, which is common, these are patients I see in my clinical practice and they're in intensive care, as many as 1 in 14 could die. It's a serious disease. And that increases as you become older. So there's some very interesting angles to this particular disease that, again, are community focused. And it's too complex to cover in a short talk like this. But what I wanted to mention was that researchers, including some of Canada's leading experts who are here in Alberta, this lead author, Dr. Kellner's an expert on this topic. He's a pediatrician. Dr. Judy MacDonald's a public health. Dr. Tyrell's at our provincial lab. This cuts across adults, pediatric, lab, and public health. It's a very good example of collaborative work, and they are looking at these different strains of pneumococcal disease and how children are infected, but also how it protects adults. Same thing comes out of the United States. I won't dwell on the figure, but just to say that when the children's vaccine program with a 13 strain vaccine was introduced, they could see protected the older adults too. And that's especially important for older adults. So this is the kind of thing that can be measured and examined and helps inform what we should be doing with vaccines. And the very good news for Alberta, one other reason to highlight this particular pathogen is we now have a conjugate vaccine. You saw 13 on this slide. It started with 7, these conjugate vaccines, and it's become 7, 10, 13, 15, now 20. And there's yet a different product, but that would look at some different strains and up to 21. So the point is, this is increasingly effective, a safe vaccine. And for many adults, this is a vaccine you want to get because it's the most common bacterial infection after a virus like influenza, SARS-CoV-2, which is COVID, or RSV. So you can read about this. It's as of July 1st that the government announced they're funding this for adults, and you can see the details therein. It's interesting because we have had other vaccines for adults with pretty low uptake, actually. And so it's worth reflecting, and especially when you listen to Dr. MacDonald's talk on how we can help to increase protection in our communities. And there have been major outbreaks in people who are experiencing homelessness, but also, as I said, older adults, and it's very important for children. In keeping with the themes of our hosts, I want to talk about ages and stages, and now I'm going to quickly focus on pregnancy. So, for anyone who's a clinician or physician on the line, they'll know there are 4 vaccines that enter routine prenatal care discussions now: influenza, pertussis, and COVID-19. And newly on the market is an RSV vaccine, which is a little different from the others. The first 3 are for protection of the mother and the baby, and the fourth one is really for protection of the baby who's most at risk with the RSV at those ages of their life, the young baby, as opposed to the young adult mother. Um, so Influenza is a really good example. This vaccine and use in pregnancy is not a new thing. And so, standard counseling for patients would be um, that they need to know influenza is more severe in pregnancy. It's not like when they got it 5 years ago when they were, whatever, 20 in university. Even though it would have been bad, it's not like a cold. You get a fever and body aches. It's a very risky thing in pregnancy for some people in particular. Anyone who's witnessed it in a hospital does not forget it because it's pretty sad. That's the first thing. The second is that there are potential adverse outcomes for the baby. And so the vaccine prevents that as well. And there's a lot of demonstrated safety. And this was actually compiled in a statement from the National Advisory Committee of Immunization in the last couple of years through the pandemic. Very good resources for healthcare providers, which I'd be happy to share to have all those details at your ready. The benefit of this vaccine is for the mother and the baby, and so they can list those for you. And it thankfully, after years of use, this has become pretty simple. A lot of women I hear from my obstetrical colleagues say, oh, maybe I'll just get it later or I'll think about it. Of course, someone can think about it, but everyone that's receiving or being offered vaccine should remember it takes 2 weeks to make those antibodies after your dose. So at this time of year, like mid-October, late October, it's time to just get your vaccine so you're protected by mid-November now at this stage. Pertussis, prenatal immunization for pertussis is another evolving story. It started with use it during outbreaks, use it in one pregnancy. Now it's very clear, thanks to nice, careful research, including Canadian researchers, one dose, ideally trying to hit the sweet spot so the antibodies are the highest for the baby when they get passed through the placenta, and to protect the mother when she's breastfeeding or feeding or caring for her baby afterwards, and repeat it with every pregnancy. Pertussis, in case you didn't know, it circulates all the time. Unlike measles, it's endemic in Canada. We do see outbreaks in Alberta, and we are definitely having one right now, as is the world globally. So, this vaccine in pregnancy protects 9 of 10 infants in those 3 months of age window before they get their own vaccines and their own immune system working in the ways you'd like. That's huge, but it means everyone has to take it. And so if anyone was considering this and pregnant in the audience and wondering if they might just think about it, or maybe next pregnancy, I just want to show these numbers from our health data dashboard. Look at the rates that I have circled. Look at the pandemic years: 11, less than 1, 86 per 100,000 cases in 2023, which equates to, on your far right, 731 cases. That's a lot of children going to doctors, hospital, and intensive care. So when you read in the paper about health system strain, and you know that 9 in 10 can be prevented if we immunize pregnant people, that's amazing. Now, those are not all babies. This here only sort of divided the data for me 0 to 14 years. So many of them are children, so they're not all going to hospital. But you see the point. It's the trend that shows you this is a worthwhile intervention. And it's good to see some of this making the news, because anyone who's watched a child, and certainly a baby in intensive care with whooping cough, again, doesn't typically forget it. So I'm almost done, but I would be remiss not to mention respiratory syncytial virus. This is a major cause of death globally, but in Canadian and Alberta settings, it's a major cause of intensive care and serious pneumonia. Also, so not so much death, but huge impacts for that little baby and their family and our communities. There's fortunately a few ways now to protect a baby. One is passive immunization. I didn't talk about this in the opening, but this is supplying the antibody instead of an antigen to stimulate an antibody. You just give it to them. So we have that with palivizumab. Nirsevimab is a new product. Hopefully it'll come to us, our province, in the future. It's a single dose. There are some, real advantages to that, but we don't have it here right now. Active immunization of the mother is another way to pass some antibodies, and there's some ins and outs of that. So these are new things that you are hearing about. You don't really need both, but one or the other. And I want to just point out, RSV in Alberta is January to February. Look at this, year after year. It's always the same weeks, sometimes a little more than other years, but it's always this consistent pattern. Unlike COVID that hasn't settled into a pattern yet, RSV is very predictable. And so you'll see guidance around protecting through this critical time. The other thing I want to point out, again, these are Alberta colleagues, including another member of the Faculty of Nursing, Dr. Rafferty, but also Dr. Joan Robinson and Dr. Shannon MacDonald. I realize this is one of my favorite papers, though, to cite because it's a nicely done piece of work in pharmacoeconomics. This vaccine preventable disease, like many, is expensive, and it's at the extremes of age. Those really newborn babies and the older people on your far right, and the blue bars or the orange bars rather, are the inpatient. So you see physician visits, ambulatory clinics, and inpatient care. That's when, if we don't focus on prevention in the community, we get big expense and a lot of stress for people in a hospital. So as I close this section, when I was just learning about your lecture series, I realized we are supposed to be talking about things that you may not have heard elsewhere, or a little it's sort of a unique angle. And actually, I think you Canadians are very well informed about vaccines, so I had to think about this. But I saw a great lecture by Dr. Colleen Norris, who I know is really championing women's cardiac health. So I thought I would ask you, did you know influenza vaccination protects against cardiovascular events in those with heart disease? That's a really big deal. Um, there's been steadily mounting evidence to show that it can protect against heart disease. So it's a very good reason to be immunized. And in fact, I shared with a colleague because I'm interested in these apps that can sort of help explain or nudge people. And there's in Norwegian country where they actually used this, the public health department shared for their older adults that this would be a reason to be immunized, and they showed that it increased uptake when people learned that this was a fact. So preventing a heart attack, for example, obviously benefits the people and families. Also, it saves money, it protects our businesses and livelihoods, and it helps us focus on things that we can care for without having to worry about something we could prevent through a vaccine. And the final little pearl for between us, can you name 2 cancer preventing vaccines? Because in addition to infection, vaccines also prevent cancer. And I'm going to let you think about it. You probably can think of at least one, I'm guessing, this human papilloma virus. This vaccine, hugely successful, hugely effective, and prevents cervical cancer, anal cancer, penile cancer, oropharyngeal cancers, lots of cancers. It's an incredible success story. And the other one is hepatitis B vaccine, also very effective, around a long time, major cause of hepatocellular cancers globally. And I was so pleased in preparing this to see that the Canadian Cancer Society has a simple message on this topic, which is get vaccinated. So with that, I will turn it over to my colleague.
Okay, I will share my slides again, and I'll pick up where I left off. There. Can I confirm that you can see my presentation?
Looking good.
Awesome. Okay. Okay. So, yeah, so I'm like I was starting to say, fortunately, before Dr. Harrison came back, is that I'm going to focus quite a bit on childhood immunization as a pediatric nurse. That's really where my passions lie. So I want to talk first broadly about childhood immunization programs in Canada. And the reason why I show a patchwork quilt here is that immunization programs across Canada really are a bit of a patchwork quilt because of the fact that healthcare is under provincial and territorial jurisdiction. So what that means is that there's some variability in vaccine schedules, in the different provinces, because different vaccines are publicly funded in different provinces. The ages that they're given at, the number of doses, etc., can vary a little bit from province to province. And there's also a difference in who provides vaccines to children in the different provinces and territories. So here we have a map of Canada, and the sort of greeny teal regions of Alberta, Saskatchewan, Newfoundland, and the territories are the areas where public health nurses provide most of childhood vaccines, whereas the blue regions is a mixture of public health nurses and physicians. So just to let you know that when we talk about what happens in Alberta, it doesn't necessarily mean it's what's happening everywhere else. So let's look at Alberta. So this map on the right side here gives you a bit of a sense of vaccine coverage in Alberta. We're going to talk a bit more about it, but this is from a website that's publicly available at the Alberta Ministry of Health. And what this map is showing is the percent of 2-year-old children in Alberta who has received 1 dose of measles, mumps, rubella, or MMR vaccine in 2023. The blue is higher coverage, the yellow is lower coverage. And I just wanted to show here the variability that we see across our province. So at the provincial level, 82% of 2-year-olds have a dose of MMR, but you can see it really ranges from 24.6% to 91%. So we're going to talk a bit about some of that variation. So as I mentioned, in Alberta, our programs to children are provided largely by public health nurses, and specifically, infant programs are delivered in public health centers by the public health nurses, where school-age children are typically immunized in schools. Sorry, just one moment. Of course, I haven't coughed all day, but I'm coughing now. Okay. So routine recommended immunizations in Alberta are provided free of cost to anybody in the province. Oh my goodness. There we go. According to the schedule set by the Alberta Ministry of Health. So most vaccines are due in the first 2 years of life. And I've shown you here the 2, 4, 6, 12, and 18-month vaccines. And then children receive additional doses in the preschool years. Then in school, in grade 6, there's 2 vaccines that are delivered. In grade 9, there's 2 additional vaccines. And then, not to forget the adults, there's some of the vaccines that Dr. Harrison referred to. So what does vaccine coverage look like in Alberta? So it's really impossible to talk about vaccine coverage in Alberta without talking about the impact that the pandemic has had on routine vaccinations. So what happened in terms of routine vaccinations during the pandemic? Well, first of all, public health centers shut down very briefly. Alberta Health Services was quick to get them open again, but temporarily they had to shut them down in order to set up structures and processes to protect nurses and families from transmission of COVID. But the changes that they had to put in place did mean that the number of appointments that they could fit in a given day were reduced. School-based vaccine programs were a real problem. They were interrupted in March of 2020 when schools moved online. Gosh, I'm very sorry. I'm going to have another little drink of water here.
And Shannon, if you need me to, I'd be very happy to just bridge the gap. I can read some of your content here for a minute to give you a chance to catch up. So when schools moved online, all those spring term doses in 2020 were missed. And then the vaccine programs 2020 to 21 were repeatedly interrupted. And as you know, we had on again, off again public health restrictions and something unprecedented with the pandemic. The public health nurses were being pulled into the COVID screening, testing, and vaccination programs for protection of the population as a whole from the most urgent threat, which was the SARS-CoV-2 virus and the pandemic. And around this time, public perceptions about vaccines were impacted. And that also likely was part of the introduction of the COVID vaccines. And if you're ready, Shannon, I'll maybe let you speak to that point.
Yes, thanks very much. No, I think you covered that perfectly. Thanks. So I will move on because I'm first going to talk a bit about the school programs because they really were the most profoundly impacted. In grade 1, we do have this routine catch-up program where kids who where public health nurses go into the school to check if those children received their preschool vaccines. So we have a grade 1 program for catch-up, and then we have the grade 6 and 9 programs that I mentioned. And what I'm going to show you is a little bit, just a little sample, so one of each vaccine from those grades, and show you what happened with coverage and how we're doing now. So this is a graph that depicts vaccine coverage, and I'm going to show you pre-pandemic year and then move through the pandemic years. And the first one I'm going to show you is for the measles, mumps, rubella vaccine that's due in grade 1. So I'll just also highlight that the target for a lot of these vaccines is that 95% of children are vaccinated. So we weren't even there in the first place. The pandemic arrived partway through this 2019-20 school year. But coverage was still pretty high for that group. It dropped a little bit in the next pandemic year, and then it did start to rebound, but we haven't quite got ourselves back up to where we were, and certainly not anywhere near the target. So that's the grade 1 program. Now, this is quite a concerning picture, what happened with the HPV vaccine, which is due in grade 6. So this is coverage at the end of grade 6 for the pre-pandemic year. This is coverage at the end of grade 6 in the first year of the pandemic. Coverage was at less than 5% for a vaccine that we want to have about 90% of people vaccinated. In the second pandemic year again. And so this harkens back to that previous slide that Dr. Harrison presented for me, in that schools moved online and you can't vaccinate online. So kids were not getting these school-based vaccines. 2021-22, things started to bounce back, and it looks like we're heading in the right direction now. And then the last vaccine I'm going to show you here, this is a grade 9 vaccine that protects against meningitis. And when we think about this, I always think about the fact we're vaccinating these kids in grade 9 in anticipation of them graduating from high school, some of them going off to college and other types of situations where they're in close contact with other young people, perhaps living in college dorms and whatnot. We want them protected against meningitis. So this was our pre-pandemic coverage. This is the first year of the pandemic. It wasn't too bad because most of the kids got their vaccine dose in the fall. It's just a 1-dose program. This is what happened in the second year of the pandemic because nurses were off vaccinating people against COVID and screening and whatnot, and kids were periodically moving online when schools were opening and closing and opening and closing. And now we've started to rebound again. But I just wanted to really highlight the fact that we haven't really caught up all of these kids that missed those doses. So why is this happening? So aside from what happened in COVID, I want to talk more broadly about barriers and contributors to immunization and what's going on. And I like this statement that for every complex problem, there's an answer that is clear, simple, and wrong, which is to say it is not a simple answer. So before I dive into the reasons, I want to sort of just show you, just as you think about people you know who have vaccinated their kids or not, and think about what their reasons might be. What I'm showing you here is a breakdown of vaccine coverage we did here in Alberta. It was a study of 2-year-old children, and remind you again that our goal is to have 90 to 95% of kids vaccinated. Now you'll see in blue, we do tend to get about 70% of kids by the age of 2 who have received all of their recommended vaccines. In yellow, you'll see 5% or so who receive no vaccines. And then this largest proportion of under-immunized children is that 25% in green. And those are kids that are missing some doses of vaccines or have received some vaccines, but not other vaccines. And the reason I show you this is just to highlight the fact that the reasons for someone refusing a vaccine are very different than the reasons for someone missing some vaccines or doses but getting others. So that incompletely immunized group. So again, I'll say that somebody who refuses all vaccines is very different in terms of their motivations than somebody who maybe vaccinated their child up till the age of 18 months and then, didn't get the preschool vaccines, something like that. This is the most recent sort of depiction of the determinants of vaccine uptake. It was produced by the World Health Organization quite recently, and it shows that the things influencing whether someone gets immunized or not are a combination of motivation, so sort of personal intrinsic motivation to be vaccinated, influenced by all these things around it, combined with practical barriers. And I think we sometimes forget about this practical barriers part of it. The word vaccine hesitancy is such a buzzword that sort of, really resonated with people during the pandemic. But I just want to highlight that there's lots of other reasons. So, we often think that, lack of trust in the vaccines or concerns about safety or, lack of belief that the disease is serious is what's driving people's decisions. But we can never forget about all these other things that really impact people as well. So let's just tease those two apart. So practical barriers to vaccines. This is a huge one for busy parents and families, and I'm guilty of this as well, even in the field I work in, remembering when the vaccines are due. Some people find the appointment making system is difficult to navigate, and certainly for those of you who tried to get vaccinated during the pandemic, sometimes that online system was not so user friendly. It improved over time. The accessibility of immunization sites, and then the experiences people have at those immunization sites. Do they feel welcome? Do they feel like they can ask questions, etc.? Language barriers can be a real challenge when making appointments, as well as communicating effectively at appointments. And then there's times where people access healthcare, but that healthcare site doesn't have either the capacity or access to the vaccines or the expertise to deliver vaccines. And then the last one I'll mention is cost. So even though we do have publicly funded vaccines for a lot of things like the shingles vaccine is not publicly funded, so there's actual cost to the vaccines. But even when they're publicly funded, getting to the vaccination appointment, taking time off work, etc., can be a cost. And I think, it's important to think about equity as well. So practical barriers are not equally distributed. You can only imagine the challenges faced by some families. There's certainly nothing convenient about having to get your child to a clinic between 9 to 5, perhaps far away, while juggling lots of priorities and remembering the appointment in the first place. I don't know about you, but I get a text when my dog is due for a haircut, but I don't get a text when my kids are due for a vaccine. So I think we could do better there. And geography certainly plays a role. Rural areas tend to have lower vaccine coverage, and distance to the clinic can make a big difference. So how can we support those who are facing these barriers, these practical barriers to vaccination? Certainly, there's been some important innovations that occurred during the pandemic that have actually moved us forward in this way. So, leveraging existing connections and settings, so providing vaccines in places we didn't used to provide vaccines, or providing additional vaccines in places like schools would be a fantastic strategy to improve access. Certainly viewing every connection with the healthcare system as an opportunity to vaccinate, having things like mobile clinics or standing orders for vaccination can be helpful. And then I mentioned about reminders. So things like digital technologies to help with reminders can be really powerful tools. So those are the practical barriers. And now I'm going to come back to this issue about lack of motivation and talk a bit about vaccine hesitancy, because it is sort of a buzzword that everybody sort of has heard. And I just want to talk a bit, what does that mean? So I think it's important to remember that there's a wide range of attitudes towards immunization. And what you see in this image here is that vaccine hesitancy is really that middle ground. It's not the people who are completely refusing of vaccines or the other end of the spectrum accepting all. It can be people who are vaccinating, but they're not sure that they made the right choice. And it could be people who are just on the fence and can't decide whether they want to go ahead with it. And I think a key thing to remember when we talk about this is that hesitancy is different than refusal. And I'm going to come back to that in a minute. And then I want to just mention another barrier to vaccination, which really is both motivational and practical. And that's around fear, anxiety, and pain around needles. Nobody likes to get needles. Some people less so than others. So appropriately managing pain and anxiety associated with receiving a needle really has the potential to make a significant impact on vaccine uptake. What you see depicted in this image here is from a systematic review of the literature that found that 8% of the general population have pain and anxiety about needles, and it's as high as 18% for that under-vaccinated population. So it is a real motivator for people not to get vaccinated. So I think that when I was talking to Dr. Harrison about like what are some of the common questions that people have, this is one that that came up, which is, can you be vaccine hesitant about some vaccines but not others? And I think this is an important point, and the answer is yes, absolutely. It's a common occurrence for people to have different views about different vaccines. So, you know, lots of people are very supportive of routine childhood vaccines, which have been around for much longer, and many of us had, you know, as children. But those same people may have lingering questions about newer vaccines like COVID, or vaccines that change every year like influenza. They've all been tested and found to be safe and effective, and I do recommend them, but it's entirely understandable if someone has different feelings about different vaccines. So no one should feel like, you know, because you're hesitant about a COVID vaccine, that automatically means that you're against all vaccines. And I think another really important distinction, as I mentioned earlier, is that being vaccine hesitant is not the same as being anti-vaccine. It's important to be mindful of that distinction. Vaccine hesitancy is really better conceived of as like a decision-making process rather than a fixed set of beliefs that make you opposed to vaccines. And being indecisive in a situation of uncertainty, like we were in the pandemic, that's a really rational thing and shouldn't be framed as being anti-vaccination. So how can we support those who are vaccine hesitant? Just to say, there's a few things we know that don't work. And I just, you know, this is one of hundreds of memes that you could find on the internet. And as entertaining as some of these memes may be, they are a surefire way of shutting down communication and alienating people. There's also a tendency to think that if we could just educate people, they'd make the correct decision. But this information deficit model has been shown to be unhelpful. There's much more to it than just providing people a pamphlet. And it's important to remember that there's no one size fits all to address people's concerns. People's questions are as unique as people are. So back to the question, how can we support those who are vaccine hesitant? And how can we support you if you are the person who has questions? So this might be your friends, your relatives, or yourself. And just to, you know, highlight again, it's not just about supplying information. So really, it all comes down to trust. If we have trusting relationships with people who have the correct information, we're a step ahead. So communication about vaccines needs to start from a position of trust. That applies to our relationships with healthcare providers, as well as our relationships with families, because we have these conversations. I don't know about you, but we have them in our families and in our friend groups. There is so much information out there about vaccines, especially on the internet, that can be hard to know what to trust. And I'm going to share with you a website that you can go to for help with that. For those of you that have vaccine hesitant friends and family, being that trusted person who doesn't judge but supports them in their search for valid information is crucial. For those of you that may work with communities that are hesitant, it's always best to find out what the community needs. As an example, I do work with a large First Nations community in Alberta around immunization. And when we asked families what their concerns were about vaccines, it actually wasn't vaccine hesitancy. It's that they had no way to get to the clinic. They had multiple children that needed to be vaccinated, but they could only bring one of them at a time, and they didn't know what to do with everybody else while the one child was getting vaccinated. It was really more of those practical barriers. So really engaging with communities is important. And for those of you that have questions yourselves, I'm going to point you in the right direction for some trusted information. So I'm just going to highlight a few sources and then I'll wrap up and leave time for questions. So this is a website of Immunize Canada, which is a fantastic website we have. The website address is at the bottom. It has information for healthcare providers, but as well as the public. This is the Alberta Health Services website, which you can also use, and you can also call HealthLink at 811 if you have questions or want to find out your vaccination records, if you're having trouble finding that. This is a great resource book called Your Child's Best Shot that is available in the Edmonton Public Library. I just checked. It's even available. You can place a hold now. I just checked that today. Although we have great resources in Alberta, Immunize BC has a really fantastic website where you can look up things like vaccine ingredients and what each of them are and what they do. And then this is, as I mentioned, trying to figure out what's a good website and what's not a good website. This is a sort of a tip sheet for how to identify a good website. And I'll just round out by saying there's also some great information on Immunize Canada about pain management during immunization for children and also pain management during immunization for adults. So I just thank some members of my team that helped me out, and I will wrap it up there and leave time for some discussion.
Awesome, amazing. Thank you so much, both of you, Dr. Harrison and Dr. MacDonald, for that presentation. I know you can't hear clapping because everybody's muted, but I will clap for you. Thank you so much. I mean, just really great. I liked the look at like some of the nuance and complexities of the barriers and even dispelling kind of some of what our assumptions might be of what the barriers to vaccination are. And I also, Dr. Harrison, thanks for the plug. You mentioned Dr. Colleen Norris, who's been a great supporter for the Local Hospital and the Women's Society and has been a presenter also between us. So I will give, for everybody here participating today, I'll just give a plug that you can catch some of those her talks on women's heart health on our YouTube, and you can also look forward to, I believe she's speaking again in February, so that was a great tie-in. Actually, before we jump into the QR code, sorry Kim, I will just jump to the Q&A first. We have some questions in the Q&A. We've got about 10 minutes to do those. So I will, both of you, I'll answer the questions and you can decide who will answer, if that's okay. And thank you all the participants here. We've had lots of people, but there was someone who asked, had asked how many people were here today. I think that's always fun to know how many people were you online with, and that sense of community, that there were over 80 people who joined us today for this discussion. So that's so great. Anyhow, there's some specific questions here, but may have apply to other people that have joined us. So we have someone that says they're a 72-year-old woman who's had measles, rubella, whooping cough, chickenpox, and scarlet fever as a child in Manitoba at a time in the 50s when vaccines weren't available. And they're wondering, should they get immunized against any of these diseases now in their life?
Okay, well, I could go ahead with that, Shannon, since it's a great adult vaccine question, and actually it underscores the point that we really need to have I think one of the things that the whole community that works on these topics is looking at is how do we have sort of that bundle for adults the way we do for children? Dr. MacDonald showed those schedules that are really fixed for children. And although we don't have the text messaging she would like, we do at least have, the checkpoints at school when it's when we're in school in person and so on and so forth. So we really kind of need something for adults. But to your specific list there, so scarlet fever, we don't have a vaccine yet, but there is actually a former researcher looking at group A strep vaccines. Former, I say, at University of Alberta, and now they're at UBC. But the University of Alberta team is still working on this topic, and that's exciting. So it'd be amazing if we had a vaccine to prevent that bacterial infection. The measles, you, based on your past infection and your date of birth, because it was so prevalent before vaccines were available, almost certainly immune, and you'll find all the guidance would say you're immune, unless you are a healthcare worker, where there's just no tolerance for any question about that, and we just tell them to go ahead and get vaccine. But for most Canadians, that wouldn't be necessary at your age and with your history. The pertussis one is interesting. If you've actually had infection, it probably wasn't confirmed. You may well have had it, but every adult is actually eligible for a tetanus booster every 10 years. And it just so happens that pertussis is in the tetanus vaccine. So getting a tetanus booster in the form of Tdap, it's tetanus, diphtheria, pertussis, would boost your pertussis just in case, and not a bad idea with the outbreak and given the waning, especially if you probably interface with your community. And actually, even separate from your tetanus, there is a recommendation that all adults receive 1 dose. So you would be eligible for that. And then I've just forgotten the list of other diseases mentioned.
Sure. Measles,
Measles.
rubella, whooping cough, chickenpox, scarlet fever.
Oh, great. So we've kind of covered it. Chickenpox, you've almost certainly seen, but you absolutely should get a shingles vaccine, and that would be the adjuvant recombinant. It's called Shingrix. And if you haven't had it, this is a great time. It's 2 doses. Yeah, and rubella is bundled with your measles story there, so you wouldn't need anything for that. They're in the same vaccine together.
Great. And it was a different question, but related. Someone asked, I'm in my 60s and have not discussed the shingles vaccine with my doctor. Can I contact my local pharmacy and book the vaccine there?
Oh, yeah, a great question. So, and our pharmacists are delivering more and more vaccines and providing some counseling and improving their skills too, which is great. So, I think it's a great idea actually to start with your pharmacist. Be prepared to pay for it, and it's 2 doses, and the doses are 2 to 6 months apart. You can still discuss it with your family doctor, but I think you could also go straight to your pharmacist. And it isn't publicly funded, so the pharmacy would be the best place to go as opposed to a public health clinic.
Great. I will, still talking about adult vaccinations. That's great. There's a question here. It says that, or actually maybe just something to confirm. I understand older adults should get a booster shot for whooping cough, even if vaccinated as a child.
Yes,
So
correct.
similar, yeah.
Yep. And it would be publicly funded, and you would get a tetanus boost with it. So there's a bonus. Yeah.
Good. And then a question here. Does the pneumococcal vaccine need to be repeated annually?
It does not.
Okay.
There used to be a recommendation to get the polysaccharide pneumonia vaccine, which it was so it's 23 as valent, it's called. So it's 23 serotypes covered in that vaccine. It's no longer going to be the vaccine in Alberta. That vaccine you needed 2 when you were over 65, and it didn't last that long. It was unfortunate. It didn't last that long. The newer vaccine, the PCV20 or conjugate 20, that's the one you could get now at your pharmacy. That's publicly funded for many adults. I actually put in the chat to an answered question a link, but that particular one, it's not known yet how long it will last, but it's thought to be what we call durable, which means it's going to last a long time. It's supposed to stimulate your memory T cells and your B cells and get a good response that'll last you, we hope, for years and years. And the same kind of researchers that I was mentioning follow this closely. And if there's any sign that it's not protecting, then you'll see recommendation for booster. But it should be for now a one and done. And it would be a great idea to get it. It's safe, it's not live, it's not complicated. Side effects have been mild, and it's a great thing to do.
Yeah, great. Another question here is that the person commenting that they never get the flu. So should they still get the flu shot to protect others?
Do you want to take that one, Dr. MacDonald? I don't know if you.
Yeah, I can start, although, you know, a lot of these questions are very much about adult vaccinations, and which is more so your expertise. But yeah, so I think there's so much variability in terms of how people present with influenza. So some people get influenza, don't realize they have influenza, and could be spreading influenza to people around them. And you know, if you're you know, an adult with a robust immune system, you're probably also the type of person who's working perhaps around other people. You might have children or grandchildren. You might have grandparents around you. So even though you may not have a profound illness from the disease, you could be spreading it to people around you. So that would be my main comment is I would say to get the influenza vaccine, as well as to protect yourself from the, you know, occasional severe case. But I'll pass it to Dr. Harrison for more.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a great answer. In addition, though, actually, Becky, I can't actually see the question. Can you just repeat it once more? Because there was another angle I wanted to mention to this one. I just want to make sure I've got.
Sure. Yes. Sure. A person was asking. They said they never get the flu themselves.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, but do
Right.
they still need to get the flu shot to protect others?
Right. Yeah. So you know, yeah. So Dr. MacDonald's comments are right on that piece. But you know, a couple things. I can share a personal story. I don't think I ever had the flu until I got the flu. And boy, then did I know I had influenza. It was unbelievable. And one of my colleagues got it and actually wrote about it in a Canadian medical journal. It was so profound. So you everybody can get it. And and remember a couple things with influenza. These viruses, influenza is a very interesting space. The viruses can infect animals and they can infect humans, and we interface more and more with animals. You're seeing this through the talk about the avian influenza outbreaks, and we all travel and we move, and so do the cattle, for example. We're seeing in the United States and all the other animals that are infected with these different viruses. The viruses can actually reassort, and the virus can drift a little and change each year. And when that happens, you always have a risk that it might be more severe and it might be more transmissible, or we could have another pandemic like we did in 2009 with H1N1. So it's not a gambling game that has any benefit to you personally. It's fabulous if we haven't had flu, and I was so thrilled I hadn't had it until I got it. But there's really no reason not to become immunized and not take that risk. And it goes back to that first slide I had about you can have infection acquired protection for a period of time. It's not forever with these respiratory viruses. That's another problem. It won't protect you from the next one, for example, completely. But in addition, why not take a simple vaccine to not take that chance?
Yeah, great. I see people are still they're adding more questions to the chat, and it's so great. We are coming really close to the end of our time, so I might just squeeze one more in. If either of you or get a chance to answer them here when we're closing up, but just in the chat, that's great too. But I apologize to anyone who's added a question that I don't get to in the time. There was a question really early on, and so I just want to make sure I don't jump over it. Kind of more on a policy angle. You're talking about the recently announced changes to the Alberta Bill of Rights, and what that upcoming legislation means to public vaccinations. And if this is very new, so I'd like if you had any kind of thoughts on that or had any comments on that.
I think I would just comment that this is the time to talk about trust, trust in the institutions that we have to protect us. So it's a very good time for dialogue. So just the fact that someone is asking that good question is fantastic, and we should be talking about this in our communities. And I don't have a short answer, but I did just take a look at the chat here. I can see it now, and I see someone mentioning, vaccines are a requirement in schools in Ontario. Is that not the case here? No, it's not. And in fact, this is all on the same spectrum. So, with the smallpox, I was saying at the start, people really didn't like that mandatory, but you have to look at how are we going to protect each other and what's the best way to do that. And this is the time to have this dialogue. And that's not just government, it's the time to use our different voices in our communities, our circles, and so on.
Yeah.
So I hope there's lots of discussion about it.
Yeah, and you gave some, Dr. MacDonald, you gave some great resources there at the end of your presentation on having discussions. So that's a great step for everybody. Yeah. Sorry, we're so close to 8:30. Participants, I know so many people are still here, and I'm sorry if there's questions we didn't get to, but I don't want to keep people longer than we had committed to. So I just will say a few things to wrap us up here, and thank each of you for being here to present tonight and to have this conversation with everybody. And it's so great to have an interactive and engaging online community. And community with the Lois Hole Hospital and the Women's Society. So thank you so much. We're all walking away with like new insights and great thoughts on vaccinations. I'm so pleased with all the questions that were about adult vaccinations. So that's so great. I also, now I know we had popped up that QR code, and now's the time that I do want to reference it. So if you'd like to continue supporting the Women's Society, we'd be thrilled for you to consider becoming a monthly donor. You can just scan that QR code with your phone. You can put it up to the screen here with your mobile device, and that will work. It'll take you directly to our website. We did also, I think, posted somewhere the link to the YouTube. So we've got lots of great resources up there, and you can find out what's going on and be part of more of these conversations. And that is all from me. So thank you so much, Dr. Harrison. Thank you so much, Dr. MacDonald. I'm going to pass us back over to Kimberly now.
Right. And yes, I want to thank you, Dr. Harrison and Dr. MacDonald. It's so appreciated that you're able to be here tonight. I want to thank all the attendees. We appreciate your support. And I just want to also extend a very special thank you to all of those who have donated already during our Between Us registration, and to the individuals and businesses who support monthly and continue to be active supporters of the Lois Hole Hospital Women's Society. Thank you, guys. And last but certainly not least, I want to extend a heartfelt thank you to our presenting sponsor, Alberta Blue Cross. We're incredibly grateful for your unwavering support and commitment to the Between Us series. It definitely makes a difference, and we appreciate all that you do. Keep an eye out. I want the attendees to also make sure that they're keeping an eye out for a feedback survey that will be coming your way soon. Please remember, if you are able to complete it, you will be entered for a draw for a $25 gift card, courtesy of Alberta Blue Cross, and the winner will be contacted directly. Thank you all for joining, and we look forward to seeing you in November for our next series. Thank you.